From Giovani Brusa, who blew up anti-Ma judge Giovanni Falcone under orders from Salvatore Riina, to Richard Kuklinsky, who carried out hits for Sammy the Bull Gravano. These are the invisible assassins still loyal to Mafia dons in 2025. Let's pull back the curtain. Giovani Brusa, the Butcher of Sicily. Giovani Brusa, born into the suffocating embrace of a Ma family on February 20th, 1957, in San Giuseppe Giotto, would become known as both the Pig for his appearance and the Butcher for his unspeakable cruelty. At the tender age of 19, in a ritual as old as the organization itself, Brusa was formally initiated into the Corleonesi clan, with none other than Salvatore Riina serving as his padrino or godfather during the sacred ceremony. Salvatore Riina, known throughout the criminal underworld as the Beast, was the undisputed leader of the Corleonesi faction of Cosa Nostra. Under Riina's Ironstead rule, the Sicilian Ma waged war not only against rival families, but against the Italian state itself. The relationship between Brusa and Riina transcended the typical boss-subordinate dynamic. Riina saw in the young Brusa a kindred spirit, someone who possessed the stomach for the kind of extreme violence that the Corleonesi required to maintain their dominance. Brusa's actions made him one of the most feared hitmen in the Sicilian Ma, with his involvement spanning over 100 murders, possibly reaching as high as 200, though exact numbers remain debated due to the secretive nature of Ma operations. Perhaps no single act encapsulates the depths of Brusa's barbarity more than the assassination of anti-Ma prosecutor Giovanni Falcone on May 23, 1992. This was not merely a murder, it was a declaration of war against the Italian state. Acting on direct orders from Riina, Brusa orchestrated a bombing of unprecedented scale and precision. Using 1,000 pounds of TNT, he detonated an explosive device under the A29 highway near Capaci as Falcone's motorcade passed overhead. But even this act of terrorism paled in comparison to the kidnapping and murder of 13-year-old Giuseppe Di Matteo in 1993. The boy's father had become an informant, and Riina ordered his son's abduction as both punishment and warning to others who might consider cooperating with authorities. Brusa held the child captive for 26 months before ultimately murdering him at age 15 and dissolving his body in acid. This crime shocked even hardened criminals and demonstrated the complete absence of any moral boundaries in Brusa's world. The eventual downfall of this criminal empire began with Riina's arrest in January 1993. Brusa himself was captured on May 20th, 1996, while ironically watching a LM about Falcone's death. His cooperation with authorities led to significant convictions against other mafia leaders, and his sentence was reduced from life to 26 years. In a decision that sparked public outrage across Italy, Brusa was released from prison in 2021. Next on the list, connected with Sammy the Bull Gravano in the murder of a New York police detective. Richard Kuklinsky, the Iceman's deadly deception. Born in 1935 in Jersey City, New Jersey, Kuklinsky would grow up to become one of the most enigmatic and controversial gurus in the history of Ma contract killing. His criminal activities included piracy of pornographic LMs, robberies, and running a burglary ring, which initially connected him to organized crime circles. The only varied Ma connection in Kuklinsky's criminal career is with Sammy Gravano, the underboss of the Gambino crime family under boss John Gotti. This connection was substantiated by Kuklinsky's involvement in the 1980 murder of Peter Calabro, a New York City police detective. In 2003, facing his own mortality and perhaps seeking some form of redemption or notoriety, Kuklinsky pleaded guilty to this murder and implicated Gravano as the one who hired him, providing the shotgun used in the killing. Sammy the Bull Gravano was no ordinary criminal. As the underboss of the Gambino family, he wielded enormous power within one of New York's most influential crime organizations. His decision to hire Kuklinsky for the Calabro murder suggests that the Iceman had earned a reputation for reliability and discretion that extended beyond his New Jersey base of operations. However, the story of Kuklinsky's alleged Ma connections becomes murky when examining his more grandiose claims. He alleged involvement in the 1979 murder of Bonanno family boss Carmine Galante, but Anthony Indelicato was convicted for this crime in 1986, and Kuklinsky's name was not mentioned in related investigations or trials. Philip Carlo, who initially popularized many of Kuklinsky's claims in his book, later admitted that the claim about killing Galante was likely untrue. Kuklinsky also claimed to have been recruited by Sammy Gravano to kill Thomas Bellotti, the driver and bodyguard of Gambino. Family boss Paul Castellano during the 1985 murder of Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. However, Gravano, in his testimony and interviews, confirmed that he planned the hit but stated that the shooters were from John Gotti's crew, with no mention of Kuklinsky. What makes Kuklinsky's story particularly fascinating is the methodology he employed in his con-armed killings. His confirmed murders included George Maliband, who was shot 5 times and found in a 55-gallon drum in Jersey City, and Louis Masgay, who was shot during a video cassette deal and whose body was stored in a freezer to disguise the time of death, earning Kuklinsky his Iceman nickname. Kuklinsky was arrested on December 17, 1986 after an 18-month undercover operation and was convicted of 4 murders in 1988, receiving 4 consecutive life sentences. He died in prison on March 5, 2006 of cardiac arrest. This next hitman served John Gotti faithfully before becoming the most significant Ma turncoat in American history. Sammy Gravano, the Bull's betrayal. Born on March 12, 1945, in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, to Sicilian immigrant parents, Gravano would rise to become the underboss of the most powerful crime family in America before making a decision that would forever alter the landscape of organized crime. Gravano's ascension through the ranks of the Gambino crime family was marked by intelligence, ruthlessness, and an unwavering loyalty to his superiors, particularly to John Gotti, the charismatic and ambitious captain who would eventually become the family's boss. John Joseph Gotti Jr., known throughout the criminal underworld simply as the Dapper Don for his expensive suits and media-savvy personality, represented a new breed of mob boss. Gravano's RST major demonstration of loyalty to Gotti came in 1985, when he played a key role in the assassination of Gambino boss Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. Gravano drove Gotti to the scene of the murder, helping to orchestrate one of the most audacious hits in Ma history. This murder allowed Gotti to seize control of the Gambino family, and he rewarded Gravano's loyalty with rapid promotions: captain in 1986, consigliere in 1987, and underboss by 1990. As underboss, Gravano became Gotti's right-hand man, managing the family's day-to-day operations and serving as a bureau between the boss and the rank and Lee members. He reportedly generated over $2 million annually for the family through union-related extortion and other illegal activities, including controlling Teamsters Local 282, a powerful union, after the 1986 murder of Robert DiBernardo, which Gravano arranged on Gotti's orders. Gravano's criminal resume was extensive and brutal. He confessed to involvement in 19 murders, including some that demonstrated the cold calculation required for survival in the Ma world. One particularly chilling example was the 1977 killing of a 16-year-old boy who had merely witnessed a drive-by shooting, a crime that stood out even among hardened criminals because the victim had no connection to organized crime. The turning point came in 1990 when FBI wiretaps captured Gotti disparaging Gravano, suggesting he was setting him up to take the fall for their crimes. Feeling betrayed by the man he had served faithfully, Gravano made a decision that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. On November 13, 1991, he agreed to cooperate with the FBI, becoming the first high-ranking member of a New York crime family to break the Ma's sacred code of silence, omerta. Gravano's testimony in March 1992 was devastating to Gotti and the Gambino family. He confessed to 19 murders and implicated Gotti in several others, including the Castellano assassination. His cooperation led to Gotti's conviction on June 23, 1992, for 5 murders, resulting in a life sentence without parole. Gravano's testimony also resulted in the conviction of 39 other mobsters, significantly weakening the Gambino family and organized crime in New York. In exchange for his cooperation, Gravano received a remarkably lenient sentence of 5 years in prison, serving less than a year due to time already served, and was released on September 26, 1994. After his release, Gravano entered the U.S. Federal Witness Protection Program but left it in 1995, relocating to Arizona, where he attempted to start a new life. However, the criminal life proved difficult to abandon completely. He soon established a multi-million-dollar ecstasy tracking ring involving his family, including his son Gerard and daughter Karen. In February 2000, Gravano was arrested with nearly 40 others, including his family members, for drug tracking. He pleaded guilty in 2001 and was sentenced to 20 years in New York and 19 years in Arizona to run concurrently. After serving his sentence at ADX Florence, a maximum security prison in Colorado, he was released early on September 18, 2017. There's also the Hitman, whose crew of killers operated under the watchful eye of Gambino boss Paul Castellano. Roy DiMeo, the Gemini Method mastermind. Born on September 7, 1940 in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, DiMeo would grow up to become one of the most prolific and methodical killers in the history of American organized crime, leading what became known as the DiMeo Crew, a faction within the Gambino crime family that was responsible for an estimated 200 murders. What distinguished DiMeo from other hitmen was not merely his body count, staggering though it was, but the systematic, almost industrial approach he brought to the business of murder. Working under the aegis of the Gambino crime family, DiMeo developed developed what became known as the Gemini method, a gruesome technique for body disposal that involved shooting, stabbing, and dismembering victims, with the remains typically disposed of at specific locations, designed to make identification and investigation virtually impossible. The Gambino crime family, under which DeMeo operated, was one of the most powerful and influential criminal organizations in the United States. During DeMeo's active years in the 1970s and early 1980s, the family was led by Paul Castellano, a boss whose leadership style and criminal preferences would ultimately determine DeMeo's fate within the organization. Paul "Big Paulie" Castellano represented the older, more conservative wing of the MA leadership. Unlike the street-level violence that characterized DeMeo's operations, Castellano preferred white-collar crimes, construction industry corruption, labor racketeering, and other activities that generated substantial prots while attracting less law enforcement attention. Initially, Castellano opposed DeMeo's formal induction into the family as a made man, viewing him as uncontrollable and preferring to maintain a lower profile to avoid law enforcement scrutiny. However, circumstances would eventually force Castellano to reconsider this position. DeMeo's path to formal membership in the Gambino family was paved by his alliance with the Westies, an Irish-American gang led by James Coonan and Mickey Featherstone. This strategic partnership addressed some of Castellano's business concerns, particularly regarding delays on the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center project. After the murder of Mickey Spillane in May 1977, Coonan and Featherstone agreed to share 10% of their prots with the Gambino family. This arrangement reportedly convinced Castellano to formally induct DeMeo into the family in mid-1977. However, this formal recognition came with explicit conditions. Castellano ordered DeMeo to get permission for murders and avoid drug dealing. These restrictions represented Castellano's attempt to control his most volatile subordinate, but they would prove impossible to enforce given DeMeo's temperament and the nature of his criminal enterprises. DeMeo's criminal portfolio extended far beyond murder for hire. His crew was heavily involved in auto theft, operating what became known as the Empire Boulevard operation, through which they shipped hundreds of stolen cars. They also engaged in drug dealing, loan sharking, and even the production and distribution of pornography, including illegal content. These diverse criminal enterprises generated substantial revenue for the Gambino family, while simultaneously creating multiple avenues for law enforcement investigation. The relationship between DeMeo and Castellano was characterized by mutual dependence and mutual distrust. Castellano needed the revenue that DeMeo's operations generated, but he was increasingly concerned about the heat that DeMeo's activities brought to the family. By 1982, the FBI's investigations into the Gambino family had intensified, with law enforcement agencies beginning to link the family to numerous missing persons cases. FBI wiretaps captured conversations between other Gambino members expressing Castellano's growing concern that DeMeo's actions were bringing too much attention to the family. The situation became critical when DeMeo was subpoenaed by a federal grand jury, raising fears within the organization that he might turn state's evidence to avoid a long prison sentence. For Castellano, the solution was as brutal as it was pragmatic. Fearing that DeMeo might cooperate with authorities, Castellano ordered his execution. On January 10, 1983, DeMeo was killed by members of his own crew, including Joseph Testa and Anthony Center, in a Brooklyn garage. His body was found in the trunk of his 1983 Cadillac, having been shot multiple times. The murder of DeMeo by his own crew members on Castellano's orders illustrates the cold pragmatism that governed relationships within organized crime. Personal loyalty, no matter how long-standing or protable, could never supersede the organization's survival instincts. DeMeo had become a liability, and Castellano eliminated that liability with the same clinical efficiency DeMeo himself had once applied to his victims. Ironically, Castellano's decision to eliminate DeMeo did not secure his own position within the family. In December 1985, Castellano himself was murdered on the orders of John Gotti, who took over as boss. Some accounts suggest that Gotti and Frank DeSico would not have dared to kill Castellano while DeMeo was alive, indicating the significant threat DeMeo posed even to those within his own organization. Next is the ice-pick-wielding assassin, A.B. Relis, the Twisted Loyalty. Born on May 10, 1906, in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn to Jewish immigrants from Galicia, Relis would become one of the most feared and ultimately most dangerous men in the history of American organized crime. Relis operated during an era when organized crime was undergoing a fundamental transformation. The old neighborhood gangs were being replaced by more sophisticated criminal enterprises, and the establishment of the National Crime Syndicates Commission had created a need for a professional enforcement arm. This need gave birth to what became known as Murder, Inc., and Rel became one of its most prolific and inventive killers. Murder Inc. was largely headed by mob boss Louis Lepke Buchalter and Mangano family underboss Albert Anastasia. These two men represented different aspects of organized crime's evolution. Buchalter was a labor racketeer who understood the profit potential in controlling unions and industries, while Anastasia was a traditionalist who believed in the power of fear and violence to maintain criminal authority. Louis Lepke Buchalter was perhaps the most powerful labor racketeer of his era, controlling numerous unions and industries through a combination of violence, corruption, and strategic intelligence. He was the primary boss ordering hits within Murder Inc., paying hitmen like Relis $35 per week for their deadly services. Under Buchalter's direction, Murder Inc. became a professional killing organization that could be hired to eliminate problems anywhere in the country. Albert Anastasia, known as both the Mad Hatter and the Lord High Executioner, brought a different set of skills to the organization. Born Umberto Anastasio on February 26, 1902, in Tropea, Calabria, Italy, Anastasia illegally entered the United States around 1917 and became a naturalized citizen in 1943. As underboss of the Mangano family and later boss of what would become known as the Gambino family, Anastasia was known for his volatile temperament and his willingness to use extreme violence to solve problems. Relis operated as a key member of this deadly organization, involved in at least 11 murders, with estimates suggesting he may have been responsible for up to 30 killings. What made Relis particularly terrifying was not just his willingness to kill, but his creativity and methods of execution. He frequently used an ice pick as his weapon of choice, ramming it through victims' ears into their brains, a technique that was both efficient and designed to send a message to other potential victims or enemies. Relis's criminal career was marked by both random violence and calculated murders. He was known to attack civilians for minor infractions, such as attacking a car wash worker for leaving a smudge on his car and killing a parking lot attendant for slow service. These seemingly motiveless acts of violence demonstrated the complete disregard for human life that characterized his worldview. However, it was his involvement in more systematic criminal activities that truly demonstrated his value to his bosses. He played a key role in the murders of the Shapiro brothers, a series of killings that exemplified the brutal efficiency of Murder Inc. Irving Shapiro was dragged from his home, beaten, and shot. Meyer Shapiro was shot in the face on the street, and William Shapiro was abducted, beaten, and buried alive in Canarsie. The relationship between Relis and his bosses was typical of the criminal underworld. It was based on mutual benefit rather than genuine loyalty or affection. Coulter and Anastasia valued Relis for his activeness and his willingness to carry out even the most brutal assignments without question. In return, Relis enjoyed the protection and status that came with being a key member of one of the most feared criminal organizations in the country. However, this relationship would ultimately prove to be Relis's undoing. In 1940, facing murder charges and the very real possibility of the electric chair, Relis made a decision that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. He began cooperating with Brooklyn District Attorney William O'Dwyer on March 23rd. Relis's cooperation was devastating to the organization he had served so faithfully. His testimony provided crucial information on some 70 unsolved murders, leading to the prosecution of several high-profile gueurs. Most significantly, his evidence was instrumental in the conviction and execution of Louis Lepke Buchalter in 1944, as well as the death sentences for Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, Harry Happy Mayone, and Frank the Dasher Abendando. The scope of Relis's knowledge extended far beyond New York. He helped solve the 1935 murder of mob boss Dutch Schultz and exposed contract murders ordered by crime leaders across the country. His cooperation even extended to testifying before a grand jury in California, showcasing the national scope of Murder Inc. SS operations. For the remaining leadership of Murder Inc., particularly Albert Anastasia, Relis had become the most dangerous man in America. His intimate knowledge of the organization's operations and his willingness to share that information with law enforcement posed an existential threat to everyone who had ever worked with or employed him. On November 12, 1941, while in protective custody at the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island, Relis was found dead on a roof extension 4 oars below his room. The official story suggested he might have tried to escape, but the circumstances were highly suspicious, and it is widely believed this was a Ma-ordered hit to silence him. Research strongly suggests that Albert Anastasia, fearing indictment, may have placed a $100,000 contract on Relis, with Benjamin Bugsy Siegel reportedly coordinating the hit. Anastasia himself would eventually face justice, murdered on October 25, 1957, by masked gunmen at the Hotel Park Sheraton, but by then, he had successfully eliminated the most dangerous threat to his freedom and his life. Next hitman on the list is Jack McGurn, the Valentine's Day executioner. Born Vincenzo Antonio Gibaldi on July 2, 1902, in Licata, Sicily, McGurn immigrated to the United States with his family in 1906, settling in the rough neighborhoods of Chicago, where crime and violence were daily realities. McGurn's transformation from a promising young boxer to one of the most feared hitmen in American organized crime history was precipitated by a personal tragedy that would derail the rest of his life. Initially pursuing a legitimate career in boxing under the name Battling Jack McGurn, adopting an Irish surname to secure better bookings since Italian boxers faced discrimination, he showed promise in the ring, boxing professionally from 1921 to 1923. However, this path toward legitimacy was brutally severed when his stepfather, Angelo DeMora, was murdered by the Jenna brothers in 1923 for selling bootleg liquor without their permission. This act of violence drove McGurn to seek revenge and ultimately led him into the embrace of the Chicago Out, the criminal organization that would become his new family and the vehicle for his transformation into one of America's most notorious killers. The Chicago Out of the 1920s was undergoing its own transformation under the leadership of a young, ambitious, and ruthlessly intelligent man named Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, known to history simply as Al Capone, was born in 1899 and had come to Chicago from New York as a young man. He became the boss of the Chicago Out in 1925 after his mentor, Johnny Torrio, retired following an assassination attempt. Under Capone's leadership, the Out expanded its operations dramatically, controlling bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution throughout Chicago while maintaining political protection through alliances with gurus like Mayor William Hale Thompson. What made Capone's criminal empire particularly dangerous was not just its scope, but the systematic way in which violence was employed to maintain control and eliminate competition. The Out's activities included violent takeovers of rival operations and bombings, resulting in up to 100 deaths during the 1920s. In this environment, McGurn found his calling as one of Capone's most trusted and active enforcers. By 1926, McGurn had become a trusted member of the Chicago Out, serving as a bodyguard alongside Frank Nitti and quickly rising to the rank of Caporegime. His weapon of choice was the Thompson submachine gun, which earned him the nickname Machine Gun Jack and made him one of the most feared men in Chicago's criminal underworld. McGurn's relationship with Capone was built on mutual respect and shared ruthlessness. Capone recognized in McGurn a man who possessed both the intelligence to plan complex operations and the stomach to carry out the most brutal assignments. In return, McGurn found in Capone a boss who provided him with the resources and protection necessary to exact revenge on those who had wronged him and to build a formidable criminal reputation. McGurn's criminal resume under Capone's direction was extensive and brutal. He was involved in the 1926 assassination of Jaime Weiss, a North Side gang leader, on October 11, 1926, which significantly weakened Capone's primary rivals. He also killed at least 4 would-be hitmen sent by Joe Aiello in 1927, who had placed bounties on Capone and his associate Tony Lombardo. McGurn is credited with approximately 22 murders for Capone, including an attack that killed 2 O'Donnell gang members and Illinois State's Attorney William McSwiggan. However, it was McGurn's alleged role in planning and executing the St. Valentine's Day Massacre that would cement his place in criminal history and demonstrate the lengths to which the Chicago Outie would go to eliminate its enemies. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, occurring on February 14, 1929, saw 7 members and associates of Bugs Moran's North Side gang murdered in a garage at 2122 North Clark Street, Lincoln Park, Chicago. The execution of this massacre was both methodical and theatrical. 4 assailants, 2 disguised as police officers, entered the garage, lined the victims against a wall, and shot them with Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. The attack was likely intended to eliminate Bugs Moran himself, who escaped death only by arriving late to the meeting. Criminologist Arthur Bielek claimed in 1995 that McGurn assembled the murder team for the massacre, including lookouts and triggermen like Fred Burke and Gus Winkler. However, when McGurn was charged in connection with the massacre alongside John Scalise, the charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence, bolstered by his blonde alibi provided by his girlfriend Louise Rolfe. While Al Capone was widely believed to have ordered the massacre, he was in Florida at the time, providing him with an alibi. The event, however, damaged Capone's public image and intensified federal scrutiny, contributing to his eventual downfall. In 1931, Capone was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison, marking the end of his leadership of the Chicago Out. The imprisonment of Capone marked the beginning of the end for McGurn's criminal career. Frank Nitti took over the Out's operations, and McGurn, seen as a liability due to his alcoholism and boastful nature, was ousted from the organization. McGurn attempted to reinvent himself as a professional golfer, playing with celebrities like Bing Crosby and becoming a silent partner in the Evergreen Golf Course. However, he was arrested in 1933 during a golf championship under the alias Vincent Gabhardi, demonstrating that his past continued to haunt him. On February 15, 1936, McGurn was gunned down in a Chicago bowling alley at age 33. The circumstances of his death remain a subject of speculation, with theories ranging from revenge by Bugs Moran's Organization for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, possibly involving James Gusenberg, brother of 2 victims, to a hit ordered by Frank Nitti, who viewed McGurn as a liability due to his extensive knowledge of the Outs operations. If you enjoyed watching this video, then go ahead and click on any of the cards on your screen for more.